welcome back to Various Sides of Life. I'm Maksiniki Chigina. We are covering social, national, and international problems that occur in our world. Today, our topic is human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. Before we begin talking about modern-day slavery, I would like to watch two short videos by CNN. The first incidents of sex trafficking occurred in Tenancingo, Mexico, which is considered to be the center of sex trafficking throughout Mexico.
Growing up in Mexico, life for Carla Jacinto wasn't a fairy tale. But at 12 years old, she thought she had met her Prince Charming.
He bought me clothes and shoes. He told me, "You're going to be my princess."
Carla's new boyfriend was older and from a faraway village called Tenancingo. But after 3 months, the relationship changed and the scam was revealed. Carla's prince was actually a pimp working as part of an organized crime ring based in Tenancingo. He told her she would be working the streets as a prostitute.
The other case happened in the United States. According to data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, in 2016, human trafficking in the United States rose 35.7% from the previous year.
From her childlike giggles and her sunny disposition, you'd never know the fear this teenager has lived in for years. But every time 17-year-old Adriana looks into a mirror, she has a mark to remind her.
Tell me about what's tattooed across your chest.
This right here?
Yeah.
I call it my wall wound. It's, the name is Cream, and I got it when I was about 14 years old, and he was one of my pimps.
The videos are heartbreaking, but these are real stories of real people. Sex trafficking is a worldwide issue that damages people's lives and brings profit of roughly $150 billion a year for traffickers. The United Nations says that human trafficking is the third most profitable illicit industry. In 2016, the National Human Trafficking Hotline received 5,551 phone calls, emails, and online tip reports regarding sex trafficking. In Kansas last year, there were 51 human trafficking cases reported. As of December 2016, children make up almost a third of all human trafficking victims worldwide, according to a report released by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. Lastly, women and girls comprise 71% of human trafficking victims, the global report on trafficking in persons states. Sex trafficking happens worldwide. Many victims become romantically involved with someone who then forces or manipulates them into prostitution. Others are falsely promised to work as a model or dancer, but some are forced to sell sex by their parents or other family members. We will take a break, and next Kristan, who is the survivor and who used to work at the Willow Domestic Violence Center, will join us. Welcome back. This is Various Sides of Life. Our topic for today is human trafficking. My guest is Kristan. Hello, Kristan. She is a survivor and she used to work at the Willow Domestic Violence Center in Lawrence. How are you, Kristan?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you for being here. And yes, I'm good. I'm very happy that you're here. I told our audience that you're a survivor of human trafficking. When did it happen? Where? How did it happen? Tell me more about it.
So I'll give you the short version of it. So in August of 2006, I was a freshman at K-State, and I was invited to a party by the section leader of the marching band, which I was a part of. And then I was taken to a bar on the Fort Riley Army base and drugged and taken to a hotel room where I was gang raped and exploited for one night. And then shortly after that, she began to use the photos and the videos and everything that was taken from that night to blackmail me into doing more services around Manhattan. And that was from August 2006 to December 2006. And then right after that, I met an associate of hers who became my boyfriend, and then he began to turn me out. And I didn't realize that they were connected until it was too late. And so then I was a prostitute until about, 2008 in May. So my boyfriend who turned me out was in the military during that time. And so he was deployed in September of 2007. And then when he left, I didn't have anything, I didn't have any money, and so I was forced to continue doing what I was doing just to get by.
I'm very sorry to hear that. And how did you recover from this?
So I met someone who became my husband later. He became my best friend and somebody who really encouraged my recovery, and was one of the first persons who wasn't paid to actually sit down and talk to me about my story. And without him, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. So, and I've had a lot of other people come beside me, and a lot of survivor sisters and professionals and people and coworkers who have come alongside of me. So.
I think you're very blessed having these people around you, who surround you every day, who help you and support you, who help you to overcome this problem. And how do you feel today about it?
I feel great. I mean, with all of my recent struggles, I've had a lot of struggles with my health recently and with jobs and things like that. And I've had a lot of people come alongside of me to support me, and it feels amazing to have that. I don't think that I would be able to move forward and do what I want to do without them. So it just feels good to have that support.
How do you feel about this worldwide issue, which is human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking?
It needs to end. I honestly don't know that we'll be able to see an end in our lifetime, but I certainly hope that we can make a dent and at least save people who need to come out of it now, or at least give them the information so that they can decide on their own to come out.
I think a lot of people are not aware what human trafficking is, what forms of human trafficking exist. So could you define for me, for our audience, what human trafficking is and what forms?
So there are a lot of definitions floating out there. I don't know how many you've heard of, but the one that I always go for is like forced labor or service provision for force, fraud, or coercion. Those three things have to be in place, and for the purpose of exploitation. So if I could put it in like a scenario, so you get a person who is vulnerable and meets a person with power, and that person coerces them and tells them that they're going to be doing something, and then they come in and actually expect to do that thing, and then that's not actually what they end up doing, right. And then they don't get paid for the services that they're providing. That's kind of a very general overview. It looks very different for everybody. Like every survivor I've ever met has a different story. The main forms here in Lawrence and here in this area that we see a lot of is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And sex trafficking can look like a lot of different things, but most often here it's prostitution, and that can either be they were on the streets and doing the back page or online, or they are soliciting on the streets. And your traditional look of what prostitution is, it can look like teenagers recruiting other teenagers in high schools and then taking them to a party where they're ending up servicing other people, and then they get trapped in it. And then with forced labor or labor trafficking, you see a lot of restaurant work, massage parlor work. And massage parlor can go both ways. It can go labor or sex trafficking. And basically providing a service, not getting paid for it.
Okay. Well, my question after what you just defined, there's a myth that a lot of victims of sex trafficking, labor trafficking are from poor families. They come from poverty rather than wealthy families, better background. That's a myth. I believe in it, and I don't think it's true. What do you say about it?
I will say that from my experience being an advocate and from my experience working with survivors, a lot of them do seem to come from poverty. However, then you hear stories like mine. I didn't grow up poor. You hear stories like my good friend Rebecca Bender. She didn't grow up poor, and there's several other of us who have come out and shared our stories that we didn't grow up poor. And so it can affect any population at any time. There's also a myth that it's the average age is between 12 and 14, and that's actually not true. It's much older than that, especially in this area. It's about between 16 and 18, actually.
So it's like college students, high school students.
And so I know I was recruited in college and prostituted in college, and I've met at least 4 other people who have shared similar stories to mine. But so those are the populations that people aren't thinking about.
So whenever girls, for example, are invited to those parties, let's take your situation and similar situations like that, do you think they have nothing in their head just to assume that something like this might happen? Or, for example, my parents always told me not to talk to strangers, do not pay attention to those men or guys who can say hey girl, or give you a compliment, which is not very respectful. I'm not trying to follow their words. I'm not trying to pay attention to them. I'm not trying to be a part of those parties because I still have something in my mind that something can happen. Do you think those girls have something similar in their mind or not?
Honestly, no. I think that we do a pretty good job in education systems of making girls afraid to go to take away their freedom. I think the downside of it is that we're not also teaching those things to men or any other perpetrator, because I was perpetrated on by a woman at first, and and we're also not thinking about women are not always trustworthy. So we're placing these gender roles. So we're always putting women as victims and men as perpetrators, and not really. It's much more broad and much more complicated than that. We're not really taking into consideration those complexities, and so I think the messages get lost within those complexities. And I know for me, my dad did a great job of telling me, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. He never said, don't accept a drink from a woman. He never said, don't talk to people. He never said, don't go to a party with a friend. Those are normal college things, right. and that's all women are doing, is they're making these normal college decisions. And I would also say men too. I don't like to, and trans right. as well. There's a lot of trans people who are prostituted every year and exploited. It's that person that makes that decision to exploit someone else that we're not reaching. And I'm not sure how we can, but.
Yeah, I agree with you. But I think the saddest part is that when families, they raise pimps and they tell those pimps to traffic the girls. And why I learned that, I studied the case on my own. It happened in Tenancingo, Mexico. And this place is known for raising traffickers. Mm-hmm. And when I learned that families actually tell their sons that it's a normal thing to do, that's when I became very shocked, and I cannot believe that something like this can happen in our world. Mm-hmm. Because I thought it's only a stranger can traffic you, but not like a family, mm-hmm. where it says it's a normal thing.
Mm-hmm. And that does happen here in Lawrence too. I've worked a couple of cases where the perpetrator was a teenage boy, and I actually got to sit down with that boy and talk with him about his story, and he was trafficked when he was 2 years old. Wow. So, that sort of thing happens here in America as well. And so it's just this culture where we're raising it. That's really more in the drug world and in the gang world where we see more of that. But it does happen here in the U.S. as well.
Yeah. Definitely. And who do you think, in your opinion, are the traffickers? Your imagination of a trafficker.
Anyone Anyone can be a trafficker. That's the most dangerous part, is that, I mean, my trafficker turned out to be someone I never anticipated. A lot of the times they're loved ones. There's a type of batterer called the, gosh, my brain just shut down.
That's okay.
The type of batterer I'm thinking of is, they will actually become very agitated when they're losing their significant other, and that's what sets them off. They're the most dangerous kind, and they're more prone to exploit their significant others. A survival-based batterer. They will use their partner to make money just to get by for their own goods and services. So that's actually a form of domestic violence, and so that's where we see the intersection of trafficking and domestic violence.
So I feel like you just cannot trust anyone.
No, I don't want to put that message out there though. Like, you can't, but you can. It's a decision you make to trust openly, and the blame should always go back on that other person. We live in a culture where we're putting fear in women and girls, and women and girls specifically, because that's who we all think are the victims. However, the blame needs to shift back on the perpetrator, and we need to do a better job at prevention on the perpetrator side.
Definitely. And if we think internationally about this problem, so whenever girls are trafficked to a different country, who do you think make the arrangements to travel them from one country to another one? Like, how is it possible, do you think?
Well, if you get in a situation that is super makes you vulnerable in every way. Most of the time these women and girls are traveling, it's to get away from a situation, or to go where the jobs are, or to find other opportunities to put them in a better place than they're at. And so when you are in that mindset, it's kind of like me going to college. I was extraordinarily vulnerable. I wanted to make friends with anybody who would give me a chance, and so I feel like when you're in that situation of going from one country to the other, like, anybody who's nice is going to look pretty good,
right.
And it's really hard to avoid that. So it's up to the person that decides to exploit to not do it.
Yeah, the other example I was thinking, and it was in my mind, is cartels, right? They arrange traveling from Mexico, for example, to the United States. So they pay for your traveling, right? So they tell you like everything's going to be fine. But when you get there, that's when the horror begins. Women can be trafficked, men can be trafficked, they can be drugged. So I think it's about also education. You know, like, if you want to travel somewhere, you have to be educated who to trust, who not to trust. You know, if you rely on somebody, that does not mean person will do it for free. There are people who will do something for free for you, but not always. That's not always the case, I believe.
Right.
So, and when the girls are victims of sex trafficking, and they are basically prostitutes, right? Why does police look at them as prostitutes rather than victims of sex trafficking?
That's a great question. So that is a question that we're always asking ourselves in this movement. However, I will say this too, our local law enforcement are getting a lot better. They're doing a lot more training. I had the wonderful opportunity to work with a handful of detectives here in town, and they get it. We're still working on patrol. We're still working on the culture in general. It really comes down to the agencies that are training law enforcement, the messages that are getting put out there to law enforcement, and their own personal opinions on human trafficking and whether prostitutes exist in human trafficking. And so I think that it's going to get better. I really do. If they are reaching out to the survivor-led organizations, or the organizations that have the information to be able to train them.
If we're talking about United States, maybe. But if you look at other countries that are more corrupt, I don't think government officials or public officials will really pay attention to that.
That is a really excellent point because, and I don't have any solutions for that because of the corruption that exists over there. I know that United Nations has a lot of initiatives that are going on over there, and there are several organizations that are taking their initiatives overseas to try to help. However, the amount of corruption that exists over there, I think that we're unmatched right now, and I don't have any good solutions for that. So. In fact, that's one area why I decided to stay in the United States with my efforts is because I feel like I can do more here.
Right.
And so, but the organizations that are doing that, I admire them so much because I can't do that.
Yeah, they're really great. And last probably question, and the main question, how can we combat human trafficking? Because as I said before, there are tons of organizations out there, and as you said, there are lots of organizations, national and international, that help survivors, that help to combat human trafficking. But unfortunately, numbers continue increasing every year, and that makes me wonder why.
That makes me wonder why too. I know that, there are a lot of organizations. I think what we have to ask ourselves is we have come quite a long ways in this movement, but now we're starting to evaluate what we have done and the initiatives that may have hurt survivors. And what we have done is created a lot of revolving doors where survivors aren't really getting the quality services, and they're just they're coming in, getting safety information, they're going back out. So we're not really doing a lot of holistic care with survivors. We also have a lot of providers who don't really understand what they're doing 100% of the time. They are hurting survivors. And so survivors will come in for support and they get judgment, and then they don't want to reach out back again. Or they're given this religious lecture, or they're told they have to go to church, and some survivors can't go to church because that's where they were exploited and it's triggering for them. And so we have all these initiatives in place that are actually power and control. And unfortunately, those are the ones that are getting the most funding. Those are the ones that are doing the most work. And they're least likely to listen to others to come forward and say, hey, why don't we check ourselves? How are survivors responding to these services?
Right.
It's actually for them. Let's listen to the survivors. So,
but I think it's also a matter of parents, friends, teachers, educators, no matter who it's going to be, just to talk about this issue. I think it's very important, especially nowadays. Just I've never been told about human trafficking. I never knew what it was until I read some news on CNN especially, and then I just started researching documentaries on human trafficking, and I learned more and more about this problem. And I did not realize how big this problem is and how much it affects people, not only women, not only teenage girls, but also boys, transgender people. So I think it's important to educate in schools, colleges. Parents especially have to say, well, that's the problem that exists, that you can face this problem. So that's the tips to learn how to avoid it, how to be careful.
Yes, it starts in the living room. It starts with parents non-genderizing their kids to the point where they have these certain roles that they have to fill, and making their kids feel like if they don't fill those roles, there's fear and they can't go and talk to their parents. And to me, that starts this rigidity that the child feels like they can't come and talk to you. And then when something does happen, you want them to come talk to you.
Right.
The other thing is teaching that law enforcement is to be feared, and that your law enforcement will come get you if you're being bad. I know I got told that several times when I was growing up. And what that does is if we have a runaway youth, they're not going to run towards the people that can help them. So, and then teaching boys to respect women and teaching boys to use their power for good, and understanding you have privilege. You're a male. You have privilege. Use it for good. And this is how you can use it for good. So, yes, I echo everything you said about it starts in the living room. It starts also in the schools. One thing that I believe is increasing and getting better is the schools are allowing people to come in and educate their kids on what human trafficking is, how students can activate and mobilize their own community, and also recognize the signs. So if their friends come to them and tell them, they know to go to an adult, and they know to get some help. So because friends will go to their friends before they'll go to their parents. So,
right, I agree with you. Yeah, I hope this problem, human trafficking, will decrease over time. I really do hope, but I doubt, just because there are countries that are corrupted, and this problem brings a lot of profit to them. So I hope United States will continue to fight for rights of other people in other countries as well. And with all the help of organizations and other humans, just simple like me, just a college student, we can prevent this problem.
And college students can really help out by mobilizing within the college, because college kids have voices. We just got to empower them to use them.
Definitely. So. Thank you, Kristan, for joining me today. We will take a break and we will be back.
Where you go to college makes a statement about you. This place will become a part of you, your identity for life. The University of Kansas, a great place to be you.
Welcome back, and thank you for watching us. Today we talked about human and sex slavery. This worldwide problem still exists and unfortunately keeps rising over the years. More victims of sex trafficking are trapped and imprisoned in slavery. But those who are used and sell them continue to enjoy their lives. Traffickers should not be called Johns, pimps, or tricks. Those who exploiting teenage girls and boys and women are called criminals. To combat modern-day slavery, parents should talk to their children about human trafficking. Public officials and police officers should pay closer attention to this issue and track down traffickers. And more anti-trafficking programs should exist in educational institutes. This is Various Sides of Life, and I'm Aksiniya Kichigina. Next time, we will be talking about unauthorized Latina immigrants in the United States.